So now we have a nice quad pattern going on here. There's some n-gons in the middle here, and these are not connected yet, but we can just connect these across the entire model itself. So like so. We're gonna connect this one with this one. Hey, how's it going? So one of the most important things when modeling something is to use references, and you shouldn't be the guy who is too proud to use references. References are good to help you keep the proportions right of the model. I mean, you can have a perfect topology and it's modeled, the technique is perfect, but if the proportions are off, then the object won't look real at all, and people will just discard it as fake anyways. So don't be too proud to use references. And you can drag in references into Blender by just dragging images in from the file directory of your computer. Yeah, so objects are made where the cursor is. And if you want to move the cursor, you just hold Shift and right click. You will then move this cursor around. And now we can just start to add up boxes to the scene by holding Shift A, and under Mesh, select the cube. And now we can just scale this in. We can also see through the cube a bit by enabling the transparent scene thing button up here. Show whole scene transparent. And we're just going to estimate the boxes here. We're just going to gray box this object. And I'm just going to switch between face and edge and vertex selection mode here and just estimate the boxes. It doesn't need to be quite exact. I just want to quickly gray box this object. And I can just insert an edge loop here and move this edge up here. And this is fine for the handle. Now I just gotta fix the body also. If you're having problems with selecting the boxes, you can deselect the selection opportunities for the empty back here, or the reference plane, by clicking the arrow button up here. Then you will no longer be able to select the object within the scene itself. So then it's easier to select the boxes that you are positioning out here. Shift E to duplicate the object, and make it a bit taller. Again, we're just estimating this. No need to be completely exact. You know, and insert edge loops with Control R, and I don't really care much for this round border radius going around here. I just want to rough this estimate, so I don't really care about this edge right now. And we need to cover a hole for the cylinder going in the center. So let's just fix that really quick. We can select this edge again, this edge loop, and scale along the y-axis by pressing SY0, and then it will be aligned perfectly on the y-axis. Do the same thing here. We just want to carve out the basic forms to which we can insert the cylinder, and that's about there. And we can then delete these faces, and then we can by holding the Alt button and clicking on one of the edges, it will select the edge loop going around. And then on the other side, we hold Shift Alt and then click, and then we'll then select these edges. And then we can press Control E to find bridge edge loops, and it will then bridge these edges. And now everything is a bit too wide, so we can select all the objects and then go into edge loop, or sorry, as edit mode. Select all the geometry with the A button and scale along the X with S and X. And I've never seen a revolver in my life. I live in a country where there are really strict rules on or laws on carrying weapons in public, so I've never seen one. But I guess this is about the exact width. Could be wrong, and that's ironic considering I was so strict on the talk in the beginning about proportions, but you know, just find a reference image and from the front and you'll be fine. Alright, so this object is not centered. We can find a center or a transformation matrix that regards the scale and dimensional and location of the objects in the N menu. So just press N for Nancy and you'll get this pop out. And you can put the X position or location to 0 and it will then go into the center. And we don't want 32 vertices on this cylinder, it's too much for our purpose. We can probably take it down to 24. It will then snap back, but that doesn't matter. And drop the tool. You can just click away from the object and then we'll drop the tool. And then once again, just put it back into 0 in the X coordinates, or the X axis. All right. Then we can rotate this piece 90 degrees on the X axis, and we can try to estimate the size of this based on the reference image. And this image is not quite orthographical, it has some perspective warping to it, but we can about estimate the size here. Right, so first of all, let's start detailing this cylinder part. It's the most difficult part of the entire model. So let's start there. So the cylinders has smaller cylinder holes within it where the bullets goes, and we can easily, oh by the way, if you want to hide all the other geometry, just select this geometry or this object, hold Shift H and everything else will be hidden. Right, so we want to duplicate this object, so just Shift D and scale it until it is about the size of the hole. And again, I'm not really using references for this, but you should. I'm just doing this to demonstrate the modeling process. Anyway, so we can either, it's a good idea to match the edge width here between the outer cylinder and the inner cylinder, so it's easier to connect these into a quad pattern later. So this is way too many edges on this cylinder in here. So we can start deleting these edges, and we can either select these ourselves, like so, or we can use a smart selection tool with this, which is just, it's a pattern-based selection tool. So if we start selecting the pattern on which you want to select edges, we can just hold Control Shift and hit the plus button on the numpad. And it will then select edges based on that pattern we started using. Then we hit X and delete edge loops. And it's still not quite the width that I want it to be, so I can continue deleting these edges. Again, just starting the pattern and then Control Shift plus. It will then select the similar pattern going forward. And now we have about the exact same width of the edges from the exterior to the interior. So that will help us later when we want to create clean topology with square patterns and so on. And yeah, so the cylinders has 6 bullets per cylinder. So we want to duplicate this form 6 times around this cylinder. And this is most easily achieved with the spin tool or spin duplicate. Okay, but before we do that, we want to reset the scale here on both of these objects, because the tools in Blender are sensitive to the scale parameters of the object itself. So if these are not scaled back or defaulted back to the 1 value, then our tools might behave a bit weird. So we can set the rotation and scale to 0, 0, 0 and 1, 1, 1 by pressing Control A, and then we have the apply rotation and scale. Then we see the rotation is 0, 0, 0 and scale is 1, 1, 1. So now we're safe there. We can also do the same thing with this cylinder. Control A, apply rotation and scale. All right, so now we want to use the spin duplicate tool, and it's found for your. This is my second time recording, so but in your case the spin tool will be default here, but you can access the spin duplicate by holding the left mouse button and choosing the spin duplicate. And you can then find the tools or the settings for this tool in the under the active tool. Oops, sorry, settings there. Right, so we want to perform this operation on the y-axis, but this tool is sensitive to, or it's relative to the 3D cursor over here, so it doesn't really spin the way we want it right now. So we need to place the cursor in the center of the parent cylinder here, and that's most easily achieved by going into the cylinder, selecting this face, or selecting the edges moving around, and then Shift S, and then you can find a cursor to selected option there. It will then move the 3D cursor into the median point of all the selected geometry, which because we have selected all the edges going around the object, it will then place it in the dead center of the object itself. Then we can go back into the other cylinder here, and then we can start moving this around. And we only want 6 holes here, so put this down to 6 and then press type in 360 here and auto merge. Sometimes the auto merge doesn't work for me, and then in those cases you will get 2 cylinders up here. So if you got that, you can test that by hovering over, press L. It will then select all the geometry connected to the specified object, or object you've selected, and you can move it around with the G, and if there's something underneath, then you know that you just have one object there. If you have at this point noticed that you don't like the scale of the holes here, you can still change these by going into the pivot point selector and choosing individual origins. You will then scale these objects based on the median point of their individual origin that forms the whole geometry of themselves. So then if you start scaling it, they will stay relative centered where they are. But if you use the median point scale, they will kind of scale down to the center and they won't stick to the same place. You can also access this menu by pressing the period button on your keyboard. Then it's easier. You can do this a lot quicker then. So yeah, you can just scale these into the scale that you want them to be. Again, you should have a reference image of this and just scale them appropriately. But I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do this quite quick. So now we're going to use this geometry, these cylinders. We're going to use these cylinders to carve a hole within the higher, or the parent cylinder, I guess I can call it. And we can do this with a Boolean modifier. So just go to the modifier menu here and find the Boolean. And then with the picker here, select the smaller cylinders. And there's some different Boolean operators you can choose between, but you want the difference one. Then click apply, and then you can move the cylinder around, and you can see it has now been carved holes in it based on the geometry of the cylinders we picked with the picker. So now we can move these cylinders to the side, because we can use these cylinders as a reference to create bullets later, for instance, or something else. And now we need to preserve the quad patterns, because we're going to subdivide this model. This is a high poly model. We want to preserve a quad pattern as much as possible. And if we try to subdivide this model right now with Control 2, for instance, it becomes a mess, because the topology is not there to support the subdivision method. So we need to use the knife tool, for instance. In this case, we can use the knife tool by pressing K on the keyboard, and then we can start drawing out these edges. And instead of dropping the knife tool every time we want to create a new edge that is disconnected from the previous one, we can just press E on the keyboard instead. I mean, you drop the tool by pressing space. So instead of pressing space, just press E on the keyboard, and you can then continue the knife tool, even though they are disconnected from the previous one. And now we're just gonna connect the edges to the most convenient location, the closest edge to edge. And yeah, this is just to create a easy to work with topology for ourselves. And because we made sure to try to align the width length or the edge length of the edges between the inner cylinders and also the outer cylinders, this is really easy for us to do right now. So when we draw out all of these edges, you can just hit space, and then all these edges will be inserted. So we have some edges here that we don't really need. They're not really aligned or connected to the vertices. We can select these edges, and we don't need that one either. So we can just select these. This one is not connected properly. Let's just make sure that's done. All right, so we just select the edges we don't need, or they are misaligned, and hit X. So one more, hit X and dissolve edges. It will then just remove the edges without messing around with the geometry in general. So now we're just gonna do the same operation using the knife tool by pressing K on the keyboard and connect these faces. And again, instead of dropping the tool, just hit E on the keyboard, and you can then draw out a new cut without dropping the tool itself. It saves you a couple of button presses every time. We're gonna do the same thing with the inner edges here, or inner vertices. So we're gonna create something of a circular pattern here, almost like a spider web. So now we have a nice quad pattern going on here. There's some n-gons in the middle here, and these are not connected yet, but we can just connect these across the entire model itself. So like so. We're gonna connect this one with this one with this one. And now we have actually a perfectly quad pattern going through the entire surface here. There's still a problem with this side, and we can actually just mirror this over to the other side if we wanna. Well, let's see how this looks when we subdivide. And I think this is a bug within currently a bug. I don't really there's no hard seams or yeah, there's no sharpness applied to these. So I think this is just a bug. So we can just delete these faces inside here and drag out new ones. Just go into the edge selection tool and just shift Alt and select these edges. There's a problem here. It doesn't select everything for some reason. Is there a... Oh, there's a face there. Yeah, so make sure you delete all the faces. There's one as well. And now it should be fine. All right, let's try again. Select all these edges. Drag it in a bit and see how it looks. Looks a bit better now. We can increase the sharpness of this edge by selecting the edge loop. That means holding Alt and left click, and use the Bevel Tool with Control B. And we can then, using the wheel on the mouse, just take it upwards. You will then insert more edge loops between. We just need one. We want the edge to be a bit sharp, so don't make it too big. And then press P on the keyboard, P for Peter, and drag it out. And then you kind of adjust the sharpness of the edge that is generated between. And we want this to be sharp, because if you want to make a low poly model afterwards, it is convenient to have that edge completely sharp. So when you want to create the low poly, you just duplicate this model, and then you just select these edges and then delete edge loops, and then you have the low poly basically. Makes it easier for you to repurpose the high poly model. We need to do the same thing for these edges as well. We want these to be a bit more sharp. There's a problem there. Yeah, we can delete that. Is there still a problem for this? Let's see. We'll see how it looks if we still encounter the same bug. And I think I've selected some edges in the background here, so I'm just gonna pop into transparent mode here and see if I got anything else. Oh, looks fine. And then we're gonna apply the Bevel Tool again, Control B, and then it becomes a lot more sharper. Great. And the cylinder of the revolver has a big hole in the middle as well. And to bevel a vertices or vertex, you need to use a bevel vertex tool instead, and that is applied by holding Control Shift B instead. And if you get this star pattern like this, just roll your mouse wheel down one time, and then it will give you a end-gun like that. And yeah, so to create, we have now created a bunch of end guns here. We have an end gun in the middle and also end gun here, 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 all the way around. We can apply the same principle we did up here. We can just cut edges between these vertices, and we are then left with quads in the middle here. But because we have, because of how the edges are divided here, this won't become a perfectly cylinder shape. It has some unevenness to the circular motion here. And there are plugins that help us achieve to make circles of geometry for us, and this is called the edge loop tools. No, sorry, the loop tools, the loops tools add-on. And I think this should be installed by default within Blender 2.8 by now, but if not, this is easily found online. And I highly advise that you find this plugin because it is actually really convenient, and it's found there. There it is, the loop tool. So just enable this loop tool, and then you can access the loop tool by going to right click, and then you find loop tools there, and you can find circle there. You can also find the tools up here in the end menu while you're in the edit mode, and then you have the loop tools here. But it's more easily accessible with just right clicking, and then you find circle there. And then it creates a perfectly circle geometry based on the selected geometry you had before. And then you can just delete this and pull out the edges there. And then we can just again apply the same bevel modifier there, and then it becomes a lot more circular. Now the other side of the cylinder is still messed up because we haven't fixed that area at all. And the most easiest way to just fix that is just to apply a mirror modifier. Like, we don't really want to spend time doing the same thing on the other side as well. So by using a mirror modifier, by going to the modifier list here and hitting the mirror modifier, and selecting the correct axis there. So deselect X, apply the Y, and we need to make sure these are merged in the middle. So just select all these edges that forms the cylinder, move it inwards, and enable clipping, because if the clipping is not enabled, the edges can move past the this center area, the pivot area. But if the clipping is enabled, then it will merge at the center if it meets the center, basically. So now these vertices that meets in the middle are merged for us, so we don't need to think about that. All right, just apply the mirror, and now the cylinder is perfectly mirrored, like so. All right, let's reveal the reference image again. I can hide that, and we the cylinder, or the I'm not sure what we even call that thing. Again, I'm not a weapon specialist, but there are some crevices here, holes and concave shapes, and we want to create that as well. And it's about there, so let's just insert a edge loop right there. Or move the edge loop up there. Yeah, yeah, let's put it where the roundness starts shaping. So the roundness starts there, and then the shapes become a bit more, gets like a border radius there. So we want the same thing. And so we just insert the edge loop right there where it starts bending. And move into the, let's edit mode again. Just again, hide the rest of the geometry around. We don't really need to see it. So that's Shift H. So hide the other not selected geometry. And the holds goes around here. So we have some basic geometry that will help us easily by using the Bevel tool in this case. So if you just select these edges and hit the Bevel tool, it will create a hole for us, or some geometry we can delete. And also it starts smoothing out here. We can also just move this by ourselves later if we want to make it longer. So we gotta select all this geometry moving around the cylinder here. So let's just also select this as well. Now we have this one selected. We selected this with selecting one edge, holding Control and pressing this edge. Then I will select everything in between. We can do the same thing here. In this case, we hold Shift, click, then we hold Shift Control and click. Then we keep this selection up here, and we just select the in between in these edges. And again, the same thing. Shift click, Shift Control click. It will then select the in the middle as well. And the same for here. Oops. Shift click, Shift Control click, Shift click, Shift Control click, and Shift click, Shift Control click. And let's just make sure we have selected all the correct geometry. We have not selected this edge, for instance. This one, that one, this one, this one. This looks fine. And then we can apply the Boolean operator. So just press Ctrl B, drag it out. I'm not quite sure how deep these holes are. Again, you probably should know because you have put in the time to find the appropriate reference images for the front as well. So find the appropriate width here or depth and drop the tool. And we don't need these faces because it's going to be a whole series anyway. So just hit X and delete faces with F. And but still, we want a geometry to go inwards here. So we're just going to select all these edges down here. And we're going to enable the snap tool. And the snap tool is found up here. If you can click it up there if you want to, but you can also just press Shift and Tab. It will then enable and disable the snap tool. And the snap tool can be put to vertices, for instance, and make sure the project onto itself or onto self is enabled. If that is disabled, it won't snap to geometry that or vertices that is on the same object. So if it's on, you can then snap it to vertices on the object itself. So this is very important that it's there. So let's snap it first to hit E and snap it to that edge or vertice first, and then again extrude again, snap to that vertice, and then it has the same the same surface or edges moving forward. So then we can easily insert faces inwards here, and we can easily do that just selecting the inner edge and then press F, and it will then try its best to guess how you want to fill in the face here. And for our purposes, it seems to work fine. Make sure you have the last one as well. You can just disable the subdivision modifier here by pressing Ctrl 0 to get a clearer view of what's happening. So I select in this edge, hit F on the keyboard, F again, and because we have a quad pattern going all the way through here, it then easily understands which edges to fill in between. And we can do this for every face going around here. Quite easily, as you can see. And as we apply the subdivision again, we can see we have some really nice formed holes here. It has a nice roundness going out here. We can shade them all with shade smoothing by just in the object mode, just right click and then you find the shade smooth option there. Then it becomes a lot more smoother. You can also increase the modifier if you want to, the subdivision modifier. Just press Control 3 on the keyboard, for instance, and you get a bit more smoother there. And yeah, that's it for the concave shapes there. But there are still more holes there. You can see, yeah, there are some holes here. I think we will make do with just circular holes instead. And yeah, so let's just insert some holes. Okay, so now we have some n-gons here, so now we can't really insert edge loops going around the object very easily. We can just use the knife tool again and form edges between these. And by doing it in this pattern, we are creating quads here. We're creating quad here, and there's a quad there. So now we can more easily insert edge loops again. All right, and we want a hole between these concave holes here. So it kind of alternates between the holes to give it a bit more cooler look, I guess. And we're going to use the Smart Selection tool again. So just start with the basic pattern, and then just Control-Shift+, and then it will select the others for us. Make sure it has selected the proper ones. It has. And then we just use the Vertex Boolean tool, which again is Control-Shift-B, not just Control-B, and drag it out. And if you have this star pattern again, just use the mouse wheel, put it downwards, then you get the n-gon, or the square here, but you form n-gons out here. And we want to make the holes, so if you press XE now for extrude, they will extrude, oh, now it works. Sometimes it will extrude along one axis, which is upwards. If it does that for you, you can just hit Alt-E. You will then get another menu here with a few more options. And then you select Extrude Faces on Normals. It will then give you this behavior as well. I don't really have a lot of depth to go on here because I put the holes of the revolver a bit close to the border here. Or is that the reason? Yeah, that is the reason. Yep. So I don't really have a lot to go on here. So maybe I'll just, maybe this is fine. But if I want the holes to be a bit more obvious, I can. So maybe, yeah, maybe just select the faces here. So I go and press 3 to go into face select mode. It's a bit hard to see which I'm selecting here, so I'm just going to disable the subdivision modifier, and all right, and bevel, just Control B, and I will then bevel the tool, and then I make sure I insert a edge at the bottom there as well by using the mouse wheel, and make sure I have a sharp profile. And yes, then oops, go back into the subdivision modifier, and then the hole is a bit more defined. If that is what I want. Maybe I don't want that at all. Maybe I just want it to be a bit more smoother. Then I just keep it like that. So now we're into debate of when n-gons are appropriate or not. And to give you a short answer, if the surface is a hard surface, like it won't deform and it won't be animated anyway, and it won't have a normal map applied to it, then the n-gons does not really matter if the surface looks okay. So in this case, the geometry looks fine, even though there's n-gons on there. It doesn't really affect the roundness of the geometry itself. So in this case, that it is n-gons formed in these edges here, this vertex, this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices. It doesn't really affect the appearance of the surface much, because this is and since this is a high poly model, as long as the surface looks okay, it doesn't really matter how bad the topology really is, because I will just use the surface to bake normal maps from it. And if it looks okay, then it doesn't really matter, because I want to animate it and I want to apply normal maps to it. So, but if you are about a bit OCD about that sort of thing, you can fix it yourself by just using a knife tool and dragging in edges here. And if you cut it like this, you will create quads between here. There's a quad there, there's a quad there. So that fixes it for you. But as a 3D artist, you want to save time where you can save time, to be honest. And oh, that's a bad cut right there. Anyway, yeah, let's just drop the tool and then insert a new knife there and delete dissolve this edge. And it's fixed. But you want to save time whenever you want, you possibly can. And so if a model looks okay, then you don't really need to fix it like this. This is just if you really want to do it yourself, if you have OCD for this kind of thing, sort of thing. But in my case, if this is what was on my personal time, I would not bother creating quads in this area, because it didn't really matter on the appearance of the object itself. It's just a slight waste of time. Alright, so now this looks fine. Let's go out here and see how this looks. I still have the snapping on, so it snapped to there. Yeah, the cylinder itself looks fine here.